This is the Holy Cross Component 2 mock, and this is mock number 1. We're on to question 2, and a classic view of the graph of the hormones in the female reproductive cycle. We've separated the hormones out, and we've got the two pairs of hormones, those produced in the ovary and those produced in the brain. But the concentrations are in the blood. Okay, so we've got 28 days, and it's a human, so there's nothing out of the ordinary here. Identifying the hormones. Well, these C and D are probably the easiest. We've got the sort of D is probably the easiest because that's the one that's last. You might remember FOLP. Well, the P of FOLP is our last hormone there. We've got a couple here, and you should remember one that's got a really high peak. So D is the easiest. Progesterone. And then also similar to progesterone before it, and then with a smaller peak coinciding with it, that must be estrogen. The other two, LH and FSH, well, the biggest peak is LH. So, and FSH, you've got a little peak here. Well, that's developing the follicle, or stimulating the follicle, so that must be FSH. So LH and FSH, and you find with the abbreviations most of the time, unless it specifically asks for the long names. Describe precisely what would happen in the ovary, and the next question is going to be what happens in the uterus. So be careful. And you can have got a classic diagram of the ovary with various things going on over time. So 1 to 5, we've got this peak in FSH. And progesterone. So this peak in FSH is stimulating the primary follicles to develop. So get the primary follicles are stimulated to develop FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. On day 14, the classic question, what's going to happen on day 14? Well, ovulation. So, but we could give that a better name. So, what is actually being ovulated, if that's a word? The oocyte, and in particular the secondary oocyte. So it's release of the secondary oocyte, and we're talking ovulation there. It's not really enough at this level to say egg, or even oocytes. Probably not enough because we want the secondary oocyte. And 14 to 22. So what's happening once the secondary oocyte has been released? What happens to the remains of the follicle? Well, that develops into the thing with the Latin name, the corpus luteum, and that's going to further secrete hormones that are required. So development of the corpus luteum. Luteum meaning white, corpus meaning body, so white body. And when you look at an ovary, you can see that. And now, what's happening in the uterus? So 6 to 12, well, that's coinciding with our estrogen. So it's almost, what does estrogen do? And that repairs the lining, the endometrium lining of the uterus. So repair of the endometrium lining. And then that leads us nicely on to the next stage where progesterone takes over, and progesterone is maintaining, thickening, developing that lining ready for possible fertilization. So if you can generalize and say maintenance of the uterus lining. But you could say development, thickening, that sort of thing. And then 1 to 5, well, this cycle always begins with menstruation, but we need to actually say what is happening in the uterus. So we need to say this endometrium lining is being shed. So shedding of the endometrium. The mark scheme says not menstruation, but a little bit harsh, I thought. Part D, the levels of all 4 hormones change during pregnancy. Okay. So this cycle here is not going to revert back to 0 again, because at some point in this stage here, we're going to get fertilization of the secondary oocyte in the fallopian tubes, and then the developing blastocyst will start producing a hormone that will affect these other 2 hormones down at the bottom, and then in turn those will affect the hormones at the top. So that's the story that we're looking to tell here. And we've got A, B, C, D, so let's just remind ourselves what these are. So that's LH, FSH, estrogen and progesterone. So how would these change? Well, again, it's probably easier to go start at the end. The progesterone would be kept to high level. This question has led us to that because it's sort of going, what's going to happen? And this is what we don't want to happen if we have a pregnancy. So progesterone, that's going to rise or stay the same. So it says rise in the mark scheme, but I would say maintained at a high level. And what the main thing that's going to do is inhibit these other 2 hormones, LH and FSH, and maintain this uterine lining. So this LH, FSH inhibited, and it's going to do all sorts of other things. For example, growth of mammary glands, inhibit the prolactin from milk, and so on. Inhibit uterine muscles contracting to inject this fetus. So let's put one more of these things down, shall we? So let's go promotes growth of mammary glands. We only need one thing in each, really, to get the mark across. And again, I'm going to go for estrogen. I'm doing this in the wrong order. That again, the mark scheme says rise, but if you say to me I'm maintained at the high level, then I think they give you that. And again, that's inhibiting our kind of negative feedback on our FSH and LH. So LH, FSH, inhibited, and does the same sort of thing really. Promotes the growth of mammary glands, inhibits prolactin release. So I'll put that down as well. Inhibits prolactin release. But from what you know about these hormones inhibiting the pituitary hormones, LH and FSH. And so we've kind of told the story about what's happened to these now. And so these are going to be inhibited, low, goes down, that sort of thing. So change. So we're going to just say low for those, or goes down. And what's the effect of that? Well, things that we don't want to happen. Follicle stimulating hormone. Do we want any follicles to be stimulated? No, because we've got one that's successfully been fertilized. So we don't want that. And LH, well, do we want ovulation and of the follicle that hasn't developed? No. So no more follicles develop, and again no more follicles develop, or released. So quite tricky those to get 4 marks. And here's a nice little one on the end. HCG, human chorionic gonadotrophin, is produced, and it can be the basis of a home pregnancy test kit. Hopefully you've not used one of those quite yet. And blah 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 blah. State the main function. So it's a bit of a red herring, is all of that. The main function is that this is the only way that the uterus knows that there is a fertilized kind of blastocyst there. It's the only way is it produces this hormone, so it can kind of the instructions to maintain the uterus lining and so on until the fetus produces more hormones. So maintains the lining of the uterus. So overall, a couple of tricky bits, but you should have named the hormones for 4 marks. These part B and C, then those are pretty straightforward. So only D and E are a little bit tricky.